Hey everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit now about what are the three major kinds of progressions. What do they mean and how do they use them? What are they good for? And so basically in the last video, we talked about kind of like what a progression is and how it's different from transits. Today, we're going to look more specifically at these three major scales: secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. And the quaternaries are also called minors, but we're moving towards calling them quaternaries because the reason they were actually first called minors is because way back in the early 1900s, C.Z. Zane in the Church of Light, they weren't using tertiaries at that time. They weren't really popularized, but they were using secondaries and quaternaries, and they called them major progressions and minor progressions. Then we started calling majors secondaries. Actually, a few centuries before him, with Placidus, they started because originally it was just directions, and we were talking about primary directions, but they were only called directions. Then once secondaries started getting used, they were like, okay, well, we should call the like directions primaries like primary because they're like this grand art of prediction in astrology, which is a topic for a whole other video. Um, and then like we'll call these other new ones secondaries. And then again, centuries later, we go to the Church of Light, who started using the secondaries and called the majors as well as the minors, and that's the earliest use of the full minor progression. Now, Placidus in the 1600s also used the quaternary scale, but he didn't use it as a continuous progression. What Placidus did was he said, okay, look at the distance between your sun and moon in your chart. We're going to call that your solar-lunar arc. And every time that recurs, cast a new chart. Once the sun and moon recur for the second time, for the third time, for the fourth time after you're born, at the same distance apart, stop the cosmos, get the chart, pause it. And those will be standalone charts for all of those years of your life. So for the 20th time that the moon came to that distance away from the sun, you pause it, and that will be a chart that represents your 20th year of life. And so the code with the quaternary scale is month to year. So we wait a month of transits and we map that onto a year of time. So Placidus was doing that, but then we have until C.Z. Zane, who started using the month for year progressed scale and called them minors, along with the day for year scale and called them secondaries, or I'm sorry, he called secondaries majors with minors. Then we have tertiaries, which appeared in the 1950s in Germany under the astrologer Truinsky, E.H. Truinsky, who was primarily a mundane astrologer, but did a lot of amazing work with tertiaries and also what he called tertiary type 2, which were quaternaries. So the language is all over the place, but we're going to go into it a little more detailed in just a few moments to look at what is secondary, what is tertiary, what is quaternary, how do they work together. Now, interestingly, Valens in the second century AD, almost 2000 years ago, used the secondary time scale as well as the tertiary time scale. That's right. He specifically gives timing techniques where you look as many days ahead in the ephemeris, as many years old as an individual is. And he just calls this another method of prediction, basically, where he says, you look how many years old the individual is, and you count down as many days down in the ephemeris, which has the transiting planets' positions. So he outlines the secondary progression. And then a little bit later on, he also defines another timing method, a method with the sun and moon, where he says that you're going to advance the moon through the chart at the rate of one sign every 2.5 months. And you move the sun through a sign every 30 months, which is 2.5 years. Now, if you know about tertiary progressions, what it does is it equates a day for a month. And so what that does is it makes 1 month of your life, every lunar return that you have, turn into 1 day of motion in the tertiary progression. So what happens then is basically after you live a whole year, you'll have like 13 lunar returns in 1 year. So you go 13 days ahead. Then you're 13 days down in the ephemeris after 1 year. So you're about 26 days down after 2 years. And then that's almost 30 degrees or 30 days down, which you'll get about 2.5 years, which is for this tertiary sun to move through one sign. So anyway, I'm just trying to explain the methods he specifically gave are the exact tertiary rates, that the moon moves through a sign in 2.5 months in the tertiary, and the sun moves through a sign in 2.5 years in the tertiary. Now, these methods obviously have been translated and retranscribed and used for a few thousand years. So there's good credence that these methods are much older than Placidus, although it sort of begins at Placidus that we get this formal definition and use and like growing appreciation for secondaries and quaternary timescales that then around the early 1900s really evolved into a more robust system of secondaries and quaternaries. And then it was sort of until the 1950s that we started using tertiaries and quaternaries with secondaries. Okay, that's the historical overview. Now, let's go into what actually are they? And I'm going to share my screen and just show a few different slides. And so to understand these three timescales, we have to understand what are the three bodies that are involved with these three timescales. We have the sun, the moon, and the earth. And this trinity of planets defines all of the three progressed timescale relationships of the secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. So I'm just going to read a few rows of these descriptions here, where we have the sun, which represents the spirit, okay, the immortal spirit of an individual, the spark of the divine intelligence, the immortal intelligence that's within all of us. It also corresponds with the state of matter of gas and cardinal energy, the initiating source beginning energy. It's God conscious. It's associated with the year and life force itself, with the shape of the circle, the time of the future, the yang energy. And it is the idea that God dwells within the eternal spirit. Okay, then we have the moon, which is the soul. It's the personality complex of the individual that makes you you and not someone else. So this is the state of matter of liquid. It's the mutable energy, and it's self-conscious. Okay, the moon's motion corresponds to a month. It is not just the life force, but it's the conscience that animates the life force into individuality. Its shape is, of course, the crescent. It represents the present, and it is also symbolic of the line in between the yin and the yang. So we have the light and the darkness. The moon, the lunar sphere is this intermediary zone that unites the eternal spirit into a physical body, right? It's the soul that mediates this process. It's the line in between the yin and yang. It's the mutable energy. And it's the liquid state of matter, right? And it shows how the ego dwells within the soul. So there's an identification of personality that's in the soul. That's on the lunar layer. And that's what we would call self. Then we have earth, which is matter. It's solid, it's fixed. It's the yin, it's the past, it's the cross of matter. It's our instincts and our senses, okay? So it's the senses that dwell within the body, as opposed to the ego, which dwells within the soul, as opposed to God, which dwells within the spirit. And it, of course, rules the day, 24-hour cycle, and is nature conscious instead of self-conscious or God conscious. So this is the breakdown of these three bodies. Now, you may be asking yourself, all right, what does this have to do with progressions? Well, here's the breakdown. So these triune relationships map onto each of the progressive scales. So secondary maps a day to a year, which is the sun's timing cycle with the earth's timing cycle. So it maps spirit into matter. Whereas the tertiary scale maps a day to a month, which is the earth to the moon. Okay, this maps soul into matter. And then we have the quaternary scale, which maps a month for a year, therefore connecting the sun and moon. So it's non-physical, and it connects the spirit to the soul. So we get this beautiful metaphysical scheme once we start to analyze how these three scales work with each other and what they mean. So with the secondary, this is about the immortal spark talking to the body. With tertiary, it's about the personality, planetary individuality complex talking to the body. And then we have the quaternary, which is mapping the higher consciousness onto the soul of the personality. Okay. So we could also say that secondary maps spiritual or mental to physical. We have tertiary, which maps emotional to physical. And then we have quaternary, which maps mental to emotional. Okay, so what we're actually are looking at with the different scales of progressions are the different levels of consciousness, the different simultaneously operating areas of awareness of someone's life between their physical, their emotional, and their mental realities. So reading these progressions helps us actually read people's physical interactions, emotional interactions, and mental interactions. It's pretty amazing. And so once we look at how these sort of work together, we sort of get this Merkaba shape where we have secondaries on the top right, which interact between the sun and the earth, right? So that's again mapping mental to physical. And then beneath that, we have the tertiaries, which are mapping between the physical and the emotional, or the earth and the moon. And then we have the quaternaries, which connect the sun and the moon, or the mind and the heart, the mental and the emotional. And then we can see how the sun is a part of both of the secondary and quaternary scales, whereas the moon is a part of both the quaternary and tertiary scales, and the earth is a part of both the secondary and tertiary scales. And we can start to say a lot of things about this because we can start to see how the quaternary is non-physical. It's purely, it's mostly just mental. It's the mental impulses that create emotional impulses, okay? Tertiary are the emotional impulses that create physical actions, right? So when you want to do something enough and you actually go and do it, it's in your heart, right? With quaternary, it's literally just an emotional impulse that develops into an attachment within the consciousness as something you care about, right? And the quaternaries move the fastest, and the tertiaries are the next slowest, and then the secondaries are really slow, right? And that's because you have a lot more thoughts in your whole lifetime than you actually have attachments or emotions about the thoughts that you have, and then a lot less of actual physical things you do or experiences you physically have in your reality from the things you want to actually do, right? So it's like quaternary and then tertiary and then secondary, right? Mental, emotional, and then physical. And then we see how the moon is a part of both of the quaternary and tertiary, right? So the lunar sphere of the emotional mediation between, a potential and actuality is what translates an idea to something actually happening, right? You need the moon to mediate you to actually care about it, or else you won't do it, right? And then the sun is actually connecting quaternary and secondary. And what's really beautiful about that is when we look at those two progressions together, is you actually see when someone has an idea and totally overrides the emotional need to care about it, but just does it instinctually or does it preemptively or just without needing to analyze it and how you feel about it and how it relates to your life experiences. You're just like, get an idea and you do it. That's this like electric quality of the quaternary and secondary interaction. Now, we also have one more thing I'm going to share here to sort of understand a little bit more from the timing perspective what's going on. So with each of these progressions, right, we know we're mapping year to day for secondary, month to day for tertiary, and year to month for quaternary. So with secondary, you live a year and you move a day down in the ephemeris, okay? With tertiary, you live a month and you move a day down in the ephemeris. So that means there are 13 lunar cycles in one year. The moon comes back to the same fixed star 13 times in a year, which means that tertiaries moves 13 times as fast as secondary. So in secondary, if you live 82 years of your life, you'll only go 82 days down in the ephemeris. It's not that much time. There might be 2 or 3 full moons in your whole lifetime. But with tertiaries, you're going 13 times as fast or going 13 times as far ahead in time. So if you live to be 82 years old, we're going to go 82 days down times 13 because there's 13 lunar returns in one year and you have 82 years. So that's 1,100 days down in the ephemeris that you'll travel if you live 82 years 1,100 days down in the tertiary scale. And so that's almost 3 years, right? If you see the line beneath the table, it's lunar returns. How many lunar returns you've had at age 82? You've had over 1,000 lunar returns since you've been 80 years old. And what that means is you'll go 1,000 days down the ephemeris, which is about 3 years, over 3 years. Then with quaternary, quaternary is twice as fast as tertiaries and 27 times as fast as secondary, right? 1, 13, 27. That's what Robert Blaschke calls the mystic time ratio of these progressed scales. So when you have 82 solar returns, what's going to happen is you're going to move the chart a month ahead for every solar return you have. So with secondary, it's solar return and you move it a day down. With tertiary, it's lunar return and you move it a day down. With quaternary, you get a solar return and you move it a whole lunar return. You move it a whole month ahead for every year. So compare secondary and quaternary. Secondaries live a year, move a day. Quaternaries live a year, move a month. So it's 27 times as fast. So your ephemeris motion is going to go 82 months down if you live to 82, not just 82 days. It's going to go 82 months down, which is over 6 years of progressed time. You're going to have eclipses. You're going to have Saturn move into 3 different signs. You're going to have Jupiter in 6 different signs, right? You're going to have actually like 12 different eclipse seasons, which happen twice a year, right? With secondary progressions, you might get an eclipse. A lot of people don't even get a progressed eclipse. With your quaternary scales, you're going to get 24 eclipses if you live to 80, because you'll get 2 at a time in 12 different seasons of eclipses over 6 years. So you start to see how the quaternary scale moves really fast with this sun-moon progression, this like mental to emotional consciousness stream, right? And then with tertiary, it's a little slower, but it's still really fast, and it's tied to the moon, so it's tied to our emotions. And then with the secondary, it's very slow. It's very solar earth. It's step by step. So the way I describe it is like, if you look at a lifetime of someone's secondary progressions, this is like if you walk up to someone on the street and ask them to like, what is like the overarching story of your life scale as you would like briefly summarize it, like in a paragraph? What is like the idealized arc trajectory of your life? The major things that define your incarnation. That's the secondary scale. Then with tertiary, you start to like, when you're friends with someone, you know about what's going on in their inner life, right? The tertiary is the inner life. It's the whole experience of being a human and navigating relationships and emotions and desires and losses and failures and wins and goals and accomplishments and things that make you proud, right? That's all in the tertiary scale. So once you actually just get to know someone as a friend, you're starting to understand their tertiary consciousness. Now, understanding the quaternary consciousness is like literally, it's hard for one person to write out. The only person that would write out their whole quaternary consciousness is if you like wrote an actual autobiography or if you journal, right? Journaling is giving all of your thoughts throughout the day. To an extent, journaling can also relate to the tertiary scale, but like quaternary is reading in the mind, reading in the thoughts that are going in someone's head. And so this is where we start to see just how much information we can extract, especially using the 3rd and 4th ratios, right? The tertiary and quaternary. Because with 3 and 4, we get so much more information. And so you can pull out so much more about someone's whole lifetime once you actually start to use these additional timescales. So this is an overview of what these 3 different scales of progressions are, how they work, and how they work together. I hope this was interesting, and we're going to dive into each progression next. So stay tuned. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Ciao.